In 2024, a woman was grocery shopping at night when out of the blue, an employee who was on the phone approached her. The employee asked the woman all sorts of things about her car. The man on the other end of the line told her that her car is being towed because she was parked in a membership spot. The woman explained that she had a membership, but then the conversation took a weird turn. The man started flirting with her and asked if he could be her boyfriend. After she denied all the offers, she went to the front desk and asked about this weird employee, but the manager replied, "I don't know who that is, he doesn't work here." At this point, the woman is really uncomfortable and asked the manager if she could walk her to her car. The manager agreed, but when she got in her car, she made a shocking discovery. The woman found an Apple AirTag hidden in her car. Luckily, she found it because no one will ever know what would have happened if she didn't.
She had no idea she was being watched until this video showed up in her DMs. It was summer 2018 in Westchester, Ohio. 23-year-old Ellie White lived alone with her pet gecko. She was such a beautiful girl, inside and out. She had this super creative, free spirit. She was incredibly friendly and she was obviously an animal lover. She wanted a career in beauty. She wanted to make people feel and look amazing. But behind the scenes, something incredibly disturbing was going on. Ellie was being harassed. She'd opened up her phone one day to find terrifying anonymous messages, and it had carried on for over a year. These messages were creepy, they were threatening, and all completely anonymous. And at first she kind of tried to dismiss this. She tried to reason with herself and be like, okay, this person is obviously a weirdo and they will get bored and they will stop. Then things took the darkest turn. Just imagine being sat inside your house studying, having no idea somebody is lurking in the shadows filming you. Now this video looks disturbing enough until you realize that he then pans the camera down and shows that he is enjoying himself to the sight of this girl, if you know what I mean. Then she got sent this video from an anonymous number, and I just cannot imagine how terrifying that must have been. She was like, oh my god, I am not safe. Remember, she lives alone as well, so she immediately reported this to the police. She gave them a bunch of the telephone numbers and the usernames that these threatening messages had been coming from. She said that the only username that kind of resembled a normal name was Micah. So they were like, okay, well, do you know anybody by this name? And she said no, but she did have an ex called Michael, which was kind of similar. Obviously it might be linked, but she was thinking there's no way a stalker would be stupid enough to use a username kind of similar to their own name. So police said, we'll file a report. There's not really much we can do. Just take some self-defense classes, which I don't know about you guys, but that feels wild to me. And get this, they also promised to do extra patrols, but do you know what they actually did? They just showed up for 5 minutes, walked around, and then got in their car and left. And this next text that she sent her friend actually broke my heart. She put, I don't know, I'm alone and I don't know a lot of self-defense. But the more she played detective, the more she started convincing herself that this was Michael, the ex, from when she was 17. He was called Michael Strauss and he actually had a really extensive criminal history. They kind of dated, but she got a bit of a weird feeling about him and they broke things off. So by this point in the story now, we're on the 28th of July, and Ellie had really been leaning on her friends during all of this. She'd been really, really supportive by those close to her. Her girlfriends would come over and sleep in the same house as her just so she didn't have to be alone. And she actually had an online friend called Nate who they'd never actually met up in person, but she was kind of feeling like he was somebody that she could rely on and confide in. And he was super helpful. He made her feel safer. He actually was asking her what was going on and trying to make her feel better about it. And he would check in and say, you know, are you okay tonight? Do you have a friend with you? And this particular night she said, no, I'm on my own, but I'll be okay. She had no idea Nate wasn't Nate at all. It was her ex Michael, again off a fake number. And she just unintentionally told him she was home alone. That night, Ellie stopped replying to her loved ones and her friends, and her mum couldn't get hold of her. So panicked, she rang police. Praying this was a misunderstanding, they actually checked Ellie's house, and interestingly, she wasn't answering the door, but her car was parked outside. So why would her car be there if she wasn't answering the door? So police actually now were kind of backed into a corner. They had to do something. They had to properly look into these stalkers' messages. I mean, why they didn't do this before is beyond me. They finally managed to figure out that the numbers had been bought off a website. So they then conferred with the website owners and got some interesting data off them. The ex, Michael, was in fact behind the numbers. And he was a very dangerous guy. Like I said, he had an extensive criminal history. He had past convictions for substances, public indecency, identity fraud, and burglary. It was a month later that some devastating news came in. Ellie's remains were found in a field, and this was clearly no accident. She was bound with duct tape, she had zip ties round her wrists, she was wrapped in a blanket, and she had a bag on her head. And who lived just over the road from the field where Ellie had been dumped? It was Michael, and he was immediately arrested. His Google searches were pretty damning to start with. He'd searched how long does a dead body smell along with Ellie's actual name and news of missing girls in the area. He also Googled how to survive prison. And horrifically, police found loads of videos on his phone of random women that he'd been filming out and about. And these women were just literally jogging. It makes me sick to my stomach. Nail in the coffin for Michael when he was trying to weasel out of this was essentially he had a lock of Ellie's hair in his house and her ID. And maybe the most infuriating part of this whole case is that Michael tried to lie and say that Ellie was in on this. He said she'd agreed to shoot a horror film with him and this had just all gone horribly wrong and it was all an accident. His lawyers were also trying to say that Ellie was depressed and she was anxious, so maybe she did something to herself. Yeah, she was depressed and anxious because she had a bloody stalker constantly harassing her. Eventually, he did weasel his way out of a more serious sentence by taking a plea bargain and got just 17.5 years in prison.
So you have 3 teenagers all die under mysterious circumstances in this remote mountain town in Idaho. 2 of them were seen leaving a party at the same house at around the same time, which was around midnight. And then they both walked down the same stretch of road before succumbing to their fate. One was found in a snowy ravine in a really steep and remote part of a mountain, which was in the complete opposite direction from where he was supposed to be headed. And he was found without pants or shoes, yet he supposedly walked really deep into these woods without injuring his feet at all. And the scariest part, there were absolutely no footprints or tracks in the snow surrounding him, and the bottom of his socks were completely clean. No one knows how he got there or why he was there, but then 2 more teenagers die under eerily similar circumstances in the same area. They all knew each other, and they were all scared of something unknown before they died. Yet police say they aren't connected and that there's no sign of foul play. But I'm not totally buying it because there's just too many coincidences, so let's talk about it. The story begins with Brianna Cook. Brianna was only 17 years old when she died on October 26, 2013. That evening, Brianna went to a house party with her big sister to celebrate her sister's birthday. Together, they went with some friends to a house on 2 Mile Road in Osborne, Idaho. And by all accounts, the night seemed to be going well. But by midnight, something happened that caused Brianna to become really angry and upset. No one really knows what exactly happened, but Brianna stormed out of the house yelling, quote, "I'm not staying quiet any longer. I'm not covering for them anymore." End quote. Because it was midnight and super cold out, Brianna's sister and her friends went after her and picked her up off the stretch of road leading away from the party house. They ended up dropping her off at their dad's house in Pinehurst, and within the next hour, Brianna would be dead. At around 1 a.m., Brianna's dad discovered a horrific scene in his bathroom. There was Brianna hanging from an extension cord in their tiny shower. So needless to say, he called the police, and they initially treated her death as a suicide. But what's horrible is that they didn't ever contain or close off the scene, so any potential evidence was either lost or destroyed, as so many people came in and out of that bathroom. There were a few things, though, that immediately stood out as wrong to not only Brianna's family, but also to the coroner who was called in to investigate the scene. The coroner's name was Dave Roos, and he plays a really big part in all 3 of the stories that I'm going to tell you. So, like I said, Brianna was found hanging from an extension cord, but this cord was tied in a series of really tight and complicated knots that her family says that she wouldn't know how to do. The thing about Brianna was that she didn't know how to tie anything, like not even her own shoes. I guess she never learned how to do it, so she never tied anything, yet somehow, now she was found hanging from an extension cord that was tied multiple times in some pretty hard knots. That didn't seem to make sense. Then came the autopsy findings. So the autopsy said that Brianna suffered from asphyxia due to hanging by ligature, but she also had a blunt impact on her forehead that caused a major contusion. And according to the coroner Dave, he said it was really obvious just by looking at her that she was hit by something in the head. He said there was a huge goose egg on her forehead, and after investigating. He said the injury came from some sort of circular metal object. Evidence shows that Brianna was on her knees when she died, but when her dad found her, she was hanging. Other odd things found were some bruises to her knees and injuries to her fingers, legs, and to her lower lip, which didn't really line up with how she died. Coroner Dave says her injuries were more consistent with being assaulted than from hanging. He also said that right when he arrived on scene to investigate what happened to Brianna, he immediately felt like something was not right with the situation. Regardless though, authorities ruled Brianna's death as a suicide and they closed the case. They didn't believe that foul play was involved, but her family refused to believe that finding. Instead, they took matters into their own hands and began investigating themselves. On January 11th, 2014, so a few months after Brianna died, her sister went back to the party house on 2 Mile Road since something obviously happened there that night that at the very least made Brianna upset. When she was there, she asked if anyone knew anything about her death or why she left angry that night, but nobody had any answers. At one point during the conversation, 18-year-old Dylan Parker came into the room and asked what was going on. The people there told him that everything was fine and to just leave and go back out of the room, so he did. And this is where the story takes a disturbing turn, because just a few hours later, Dylan himself would also be dead. So that evening, Dylan was at the same house on 2 Mile Road where Brianna stormed off from, and later ended up dead. He was there that night, just like Brianna, for a house party. At this party, there was a lot of alcohol and drugs going around, and at midnight, Dylan called his mom and asked her to come and pick him up. It was a really snowy and cold night, and his mom was pretty upset with him for drinking underage. But ultimately, she just wanted Dylan to get home safe. So on the phone, Dylan told her that he left the party and was now walking to a nearby gas station just south of the house. It was literally less than a mile away, and Dylan grew up in the area, so he knew this route like the back of his hand. He told his mom he was walking straight there, which wasn't hard to do because it was pretty much the direction towards town. So there was a bunch of street lights and city lights and all of that. They ended up hanging up as his mom was already in the car and on her way there. But just a few minutes later, she gets another call from Dylan. This time when she answered, Dylan was scared and very panicky. He just kept asking her where she was because he was scared, and she told him that she was literally just a minute away. But by the time she got to the gas station, Dylan was nowhere to be found. She tried calling him several times, but at this point, his phone had been turned off. His mom asked the gas station attendant if they'd seen Dylan, but they said no. And then she spent the next 30 minutes driving around and yelling out of her window for her son. But it was like he just vanished into thin air. Dylan's mom knew something was really wrong, so she immediately reported him missing to the police, which kickstarted a massive search for him. They scoured the entire area looking for him, and they also interviewed the people at the party house on 2 Mile Road. But everyone there said that Dylan seemed okay when he left, and that he left because his mom was coming to pick him up. Nothing out of the ordinary, yet there was no trace of Dylan. No footprints or tracks in the snow surrounding the party house, just nothing. Then, 10 days later, his body would be found, but it was found in an area where there's really no explanation on how he got there. So on the evening of January 21st, 2014, a couple of people were out riding their ATVs in a really remote mountainy area north of the party house when they crashed. Their ATV slid down this really steep and rocky hill, and since it was pitch black outside, they decided to just come back the next morning to try and find it, so that's what they did. But as they were looking for their ATV the next day, they also stumbled across Dylan's frozen body. This was in the 2 Mile Gulch area, so super remote, really rocky terrain, and it was also uphill pretty far away from the party house. He was found in a snowy ravine with no pants and no shoes, just socks on his feet. And this is the part of the story that is really strange and honestly disturbing. So Dylan's entire body was covered in injuries, which police say were consistent with stumbling through the woods. But the weird part is that Dylan had no injuries at all to his feet, which you would think he would have at least some scratches if he had really walked that far into the woods with no shoes. And even creepier is the fact that the bottom of his socks were completely clean. No sign of any snow, slush, or dirt, just spotless. This has led many people to question how exactly he got to where he was found with clean socks and no damage to his feet. According to the autopsy report, Dylan died from hypothermia with alcohol and drugs as a contributing factor. So police think that he somehow walked to where he was found, and that's when he took off his pants and shoes. But the weird part is that his pants and shoes have never been found. If what police say happened actually happened, those two items would at least be in that same vicinity, but they weren't. And perhaps the most disturbing detail of all is that when Dylan was found, there were no footprints or tracks in the snow surrounding him at all. It reportedly didn't snow there from when Dylan went missing to when he was found, and the temperature wasn't warm enough to have melted some of the snow or potential tracks away. So in theory, any tracks that Dylan would have left on his way up the mountain to where he was found should have still been there, but there were none. So that leaves one major question. How did Dylan get to that exact spot on the mountain, and why. Some wonder if Dylan was being chased into the woods, or maybe if he was forced into them with no clothes as a prank, maybe from someone at the party that night. That would explain why he called his mom for a second time so scared that night. Some wonder if he was carried into the woods since his socks were completely clean, but again, you'd think there would be other tracks or footprints in the snow if that were the case. One thing that his mom just doesn't understand is how he ended up on that mountain. This was in the complete opposite direction as the gas station and away from all of the city lights. Like I said, he knew this area extremely well after having grown up there, so it just doesn't make sense why he would willingly go in the opposite direction where it was pitch black towards the mountain. Dylan's case was quickly closed though. Police are firm in the fact that there were no signs of foul play and that he just accidentally died of hypothermia. I don't think anyone is questioning the fact that he froze to death, but it just seems unlikely that he wandered up there on his own. But it wasn't until Dylan's death that Brianna's family started questioning if they were possibly connected. I mean, both Dylan and Brianna died after leaving the same house on 2 Mile Road. They both left at around the same time, which was midnight, and they both walked down that same stretch of road to their fate. I know how they died is drastically different, but what are the odds that Dylan would go missing and die just a few hours after Brianna's family went to that party house questioning what they knew? Dylan was there and was wondering what was going on when the owners of the house told him everything was fine and to leave the room. And then just a few hours later, as we all know, he would mysteriously die too. That just does not sit right with me at all. Brianna was apparently super outspoken against suicide and told her family that she would never do that to them. So it's left many wondering what happened at and immediately after those parties. Dylan's mom thinks these two cases are connected, and she since hired a PI to investigate. Just when things couldn't get any stranger though, just a few months later, another teenager would be found dead. Coroner Dave Roos got the call that he was never expecting. It was the police, and they said, quote, "Dave, there's another one." End quote. On April 29th, 2014, 19-year-old Ashley Sullivan was found hanging from a tree in Kootenai County, Idaho. She was found hanging from a tow strap rope, something she didn't even have access to. Ashley knew both Dylan and Brianna as they all went to the same high school together, and she was just shocked by their untimely deaths. Just before she died, Ashley told her mom that she was scared of something, but she never said what. But when Coroner Dave investigated the scene, one thing immediately stood out to him. There in the middle of Ashley's forehead was a massive wound, just like Brianna's. Dave said it was actually almost identical to Brianna's, so much so that if you lined up their foreheads, you wouldn't be able to tell who was who. Even though this was a clear injury, this was never officially noted in her autopsy report, which was odd to Dave. Ultimately though, and seemingly without any investigation, Ashley's death was ruled a suicide. And just like the other two, her case was quickly closed. Just a few weeks after Ashley was found dead, Coroner Dave was unexpectedly fired. He thinks it's because he was very vocal about believing all three cases were somehow connected and that something really sinister was going on. Simply put, he thinks he was fired because he refused to keep quiet like authorities wanted. And Dave went on the record to say, quote, "If you want to commit murder, do it in Shoshone County. You'll get away with it." End quote. So as of today, all three cases are closed, and according to police, no foul play is suspected. They believe that alcohol and drugs were a contributing factor to these cases, even though both Brianna and Ashley didn't seem like they were going to end their lives like that. But it's now been 11 years, and whatever happened to all of those teenagers in Idaho remains a mystery.
This mother and son were lost at sea for 8 days and presumed dead. When only he came back alive, they thought that he killed her. This is the case behind the new Netflix true crime documentary, The Carmen Family Deaths. On September 17th, 2016, 56-year-old Linda Carmen and her 22-year-old son Nathan left for a fishing trip. Going out on these fishing trips was something that the mother and son did a lot together. It honestly wasn't Linda's favorite thing to do, but it was how her and her son bonded. Linda and Nathan were supposed to return the following day, but they never did. The Coast Guard ended up doing this huge search. Like, they searched over 64,000 nautical square miles, and there were no signs of Linda, Nathan, or Nathan's boat. And after 6 long days of extensive searches of the sea, the search was called off, and the mother and son that were once presumed lost at sea were now presumed dead. And then 8 days after first going missing, 22-year-old Nathan was found alive by a large cargo ship just floating on a life raft in the middle of the ocean. He had seemingly survived by just floating on this tiny blow-up lifeboat for over a week. All things considered, Nathan was in pretty good shape, but tragically his mom Linda was not with him. Nathan said for some reason him and his mom ended up going deep sea fishing the day that they disappeared, even though they they had never gone deep sea fishing before. They actually went 70 miles out into the ocean, farther than they had ever gone before. The day after they left, around midday, Nathan said that he heard a strange noise coming from the engine and that the boat was taking in water. Nathan said that he did not think the problem was that serious and that he would be able to fix it, so despite having a radio, he never radioed for help, something that a lot of people have had a lot of problems with. Nathan and his mom, Linda, are frantically trying to scoop water out of their boat. But before Nathan knew it, it was too late, and within minutes, the boat had completely filled with water and sunk beneath their feet. Nathan luckily had enough time to grab the life raft, but by the time everything was over, his mom, Linda, had seemingly disappeared. He didn't see her, he didn't hear her, nothing. At first, this really did seem like a tragic accident, but also this remarkable story of survival, how Nathan was able to survive just floating in the middle of the ocean for over a week. But very quickly, public opinion started to change. There were already things that I previously mentioned that were really weird to people, but then there was more, and just adding it all up, it did not look good. It looked really suspicious. Everyone that knew Linda said that she did not like fishing and she would never have gone deep sea fishing. Right before heading to the marina, Nathan and his mom were seen on CCTV footage buying bait, but that exact bait was found in Nathan's vehicle. He did not bring the bait with him fishing, but he bought it right before going fishing. That's pretty weird. But probably the biggest thing that made the public and the investigators suspicious of Nathan was his behavior. He was emotionless. He did not seem like a young man grieving the tragic death of his mother. He seemed cold and calculated. But Nathan Carmen was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder around the age of 5. He was always a bit socially awkward. He had trouble expressing and showing emotion. He was more calculated in his thought and his speech. And if you have someone in your life that is on the spectrum, that might sound really familiar. But to the investigators, it made Nathan suspicious of murder, especially after diving into Nathan's background, because turns out this was not the first member of his family to die after last being seen with Nathan. So here's a little bit more about this family's background. Nathan's mom, Linda, was one of 4 daughters to her mother and her father, John Chuckless. Her father, John, had this big, larger-than-life personality. He was very hardworking and even more successful. This family had a lot of money. I'm talking tens of millions of dollars. It was said that Linda was the most like her father, John. They both had these big personalities. They were stubborn and hard-headed, so they would butt heads a lot. John would even threaten to cut off his daughter Linda, like cut her off from his money and her inheritance if she ever disobeyed him, even into her adulthood. Linda married and they had their one and only child, Nathan. He was the firstborn grandson in this family, so his grandfather John was like obsessed with him. Linda and her father John would argue constantly about how to raise Nathan because John was a part of the older generation. He didn't fully understand autism, or at least that's what the family says. Nathan struggled a lot in his teen years. He didn't have any friends. He was bullied. At one point, he ran away. At one point, his parents literally had Nathan abducted. Grown men came into his room in the middle of the night and against his will took him to one of those disturbing teen behavior camps. Nathan was definitely closest with his grandfather John, and John showered Nathan in money. On December 20th, 2013, Nathan's grandfather and Linda's father, John Chuckless, was found murdered in his bed, shot in the head. His $42 million estate was split between his 4 daughters, and his grandson, Nathan, was the last person to ever see him alive. They had dinner the night before, but Nathan says it was a good, normal time. They parted ways around 8 p.m., so Nathan could go meet his mom, Linda, at 3 a.m. for a fishing trip. The only issue is that during the time that John was believed to be murdered, there's about an hour that Nathan is unaccounted for, and he was actually over an hour late to meeting his mom with no explanation why. And the night that his grandfather was murdered, Nathan actually removed the GPS from his truck. When questioned by the police, Nathan said that he did not own a gun. But in a search of Nathan's home, they found a receipt for the same caliber weapon that was used to murder his grandfather John. This weapon was actually purchased less than a month before John was murdered. It was purchased out of state and with cash, so it couldn't be traced. So not only did Nathan lie about owning a weapon, to this very day, that weapon has never been found. The entire family agreed to take a polygraph test except for Nathan. During his mother Linda's polygraph, she repeatedly failed on the same question, which was, do you know who killed your father? Is it possible that Linda knew that her son killed her father, but that she was protecting him? Pretty much their entire family thought so, including her 3 sisters. The investigators tried to get a warrant to arrest Nathan for his grandfather's murder, but it was denied because a neighbor reported hearing gunshots around 2 a.m. the night that John was killed. At that exact time, Nathan was seen on his apartment's surveillance cameras, meaning that Nathan could not have killed his grandfather. But what if the neighbors just got the time wrong? It has also been highly debated what Nathan even stood to gain if his grandfather was killed. Nathan wasn't one of John's 4 daughters that were going to split the $40 million estate. If anything, it seemed like Nathan would be worse off if his grandfather was killed because his grandfather was giving him thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars every single week. But Nathan did receive a $400,000 life insurance policy following his grandfather's death. And only 3 years later, Nathan's mother disappeared on the high seas and was presumed dead, and he was her sole beneficiary. Leading up to Linda's disappearance, her relationship with her son Nathan was rocky, and her family that believed that her son had also killed her father were warning her that she was likely going to be next. And after she disappeared, that entire side of the family publicly turned on Nathan because they truly believed that he killed 2 members of their family to inherit their family's wealth. Prior to his grandfather's murder, Nathan reached out to his grandfather's trust and estate with a lot of questions about his grandfather's money and his inheritance. Like more specifically, what Nathan was set to inherit if his grandfather and his mother both died. And in a case seemingly all about money and greed, it's not surprising that it was money that was ultimately Nathan's downfall. 2 weeks after his mother and his boat disappeared at sea, Nathan filed an $85,000 insurance claim on his boat. And right as the insurance company was getting ready to pay, they started hearing some really interesting things. Witnesses at the marina reported that the same day that Nathan and his mother Linda went out on their boat and only one of them came back, Nathan was seen removing parts from his boat and drilling holes into his boat. And I am absolutely no expert on boats. Please don't come for me if I got this wrong, but from what I read and what I saw in the documentary, what these witnesses reported Nathan doing to his boat would ultimately sink his boat. So believing that they had hard evidence that Nathan purposefully sank his own boat, the insurance company sued him. And in this civil lawsuit, the judge found that the boat sank because of the damage that Nathan caused to it. So in a sense, even though this is a civil lawsuit, he was found guilty of purposefully sinking his own boat. And after Nathan's insurance claim was denied, the insurance company handed over all of their evidence to the investigators and the FBI. And in 2022, 6 years after his mother disappeared, the now 28-year-old Nathan Carmen was arrested for her murder. He was also pretty much being accused of killing his grandfather, all to inherit his family's millions of dollars. The prosecution even had experts that planned to testify that where Nathan was ultimately rescued was about 80 miles in the opposite direction of where he would have drifted if his boat sank where and when he said it did. Nathan Carmen's murder trial was set to begin in October of 2023, but before he could go to trial, Nathan Carmen unalived himself in his cell. There's a lot of people that believe that this was the final life taken by a guilty man. But there's also a lot of people that believe that Nathan Carmen was completely innocent of his mother and his grandfather's murder, and that he was an extremely misunderstood individual that did this to himself after a lifetime of feeling like the world was against him. Following his death, all the charges against Nathan Carmen were dropped. Linda was officially declared dead in 2023, and the case on her death is closed. Her father John's unsolved murder is still considered a closed case. Have you seen this documentary yet? I need to know what your thoughts are. Please let me know all your thoughts, theories, and opinions in the comments. I need to know what you guys are thinking. I feel like this is one that could go either way. So please let me know all your thoughts, theories, and opinions in the comments. But while you're there, please always remember to be respectful. There are living members of this family. There are loved ones that are still alive and are likely on the internet looking at public opinion since this Netflix documentary just dropped. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, but please be respectful. And while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested I covered this case, because there's a lot of you. And I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
In 2012, James Holmes destroyed a lot of lives in a matter of seconds, and to this day, he continues to be the reason as to why so many people will never ever go back to a movie theater. Do want to give a massive mental health warning at the start of this video. We're talking about a lot of sensitive topics, including mental illnesses, and today's case also involves a mass amount of victims and a lot of graphic injuries. If you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health in any way, shape, and form, please skip this video. I totally understand. Your mental health matters the most. Take care of yourselves. I mean it. I love you. July 20th of 2012 was the nationwide release date in theaters for The Dark Knight Rises. It was the third movie and the end of one of the biggest trilogies in movie history. It was a big deal. One of the sold out showtimes for this premiere was in a theater in Aurora, Colorado at 12:05 a.m., just 5 minutes after midnight. People showed up to the theater hours before midnight because they were just that excited. July 20th was also a big day for James Holmes because that was the day that he decided to put his plan into action. And he specifically chose to do what he did at a movie theater because it made sense. It was full of people, which was important to him. It was full of random people, which was good because he had no connection to them. It was dark, it was loud, making it easier for him to hide. It had an exit door, allowing him to walk in and out in a matter of seconds. It was perfect for what he wanted to do. He had prepared ahead of time for that night by checking a few things off his list. He had actually been preparing for at least 4 months, purchasing things in person as well as getting a quote high volume of deliveries to his apartment, buying things such as masks, weapons, hair dye, protective gear, and purchasing one ticket for the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises. And when the day came, he felt good, he felt ready, he wasn't worried or panicked, he was instead extremely calm and collected. On July 20th, after midnight, 18 minutes into the movie, James entered movie theater 9 through the exit door, dressed head to toe in protective gear, helmet on, weapon in hand. One of the people in the theater who was sitting in the first couple of rows later said that he could not see James's face, but he could see his outline right in front of the movie screen. Not only his outline, but also the clear outline of the weapon that he had with him. James threw 2 items into the crowd that people heard making hissing sounds as they flew towards them, and then those went off. Some people described it to feel like fireworks, and within minutes, maybe seconds, the air around them was cloudy and they felt their lungs burning and their eyes burning, and then James used his weapons without holding back, sending every single person in that movie theater into a complete panic. After realizing that the loud banging sounds were not coming from the movie, but instead were happening in real life, some people's natural reactions was to jump and try and run and make it to the exit doors, but others were not moving fast enough, causing the people behind them to have no other option but to lay down on the ground, duck down, and rely on the seats to protect them. Popcorn was flying in the air sooner than later. Pieces of flesh were also flying in the air from the injuries. Bang after bang after bang. A pregnant woman was so badly injured she was trying to tend to her husband, the father of her baby, who had a horrible injury through his head, through his eyeball, making his face unrecognizable. Sitting in utter chaos, people yelling around her, her trying to decide if she should save herself to try and save her baby or save her husband to make sure that at least her baby grew up with a father. Another girl leaning over on the ground with tears streaming down her face, whispering to a stranger next to her, telling her that she thinks that her boyfriend is gone. Another young woman had been so badly injured that her intestines in her stomach fell out. She had to catch them with her hands and physically put them back in place, holding them in place, hoping a medical team would get to her before it was too late. A husband looking down at his wife and being able to see her brain matter exposed because of how badly she had been hurt. The lights still off, the movie still playing in the background throughout all of this, making it only harder for people to realize actually what was going on. And eventually a flood of 911 calls coming from not only inside, outside, but also from around the theater. Multiple officers and ambulances were dispatched. One of the officers calling for backup and another one calling at 1:27 a.m. to say, quote, "Bring as much crime scene tape as you can," end quote. Officers themselves driving victims to the hospitals in their cars because the amount of ambulances were not enough. All of that damage caused by one person, 24-year-old James Holmes. He surrendered himself to police officers outside of the theater within 7 minutes of the first 911 calls, and he was placed under arrest and taken into custody. Authorities at first, actually, when they first saw him, did not realize that he was the person they were looking for because he was covered in protective gear, head to toe dressed in black just like they were, and he was wearing a mask. But when they saw him trying to get into his car in the parking lot very calmly instead of rushing, helping people like everyone else was doing, they realized that his body language made him look like the only person that stood out, and he looked at them and then he smiled. His eyes were dark all around, they looked evil, and that's when they knew that it was him. 12 people left their homes that night to go to that movie premiere and never made it back, the oldest out of those 12 being 51 years old, the youngest being 6. Apart from those 12 people, an additional 70 people were badly injured. The following day, July 21st of 2012, many victims remained in the hospital undergoing either treatment or life-saving surgeries, while a group of law enforcement authorities and investigators surrounded James's apartment, where they found a plethora of homemade destructive devices, 10 gallons of gasoline, jars filled with volatile chemicals meant to go off if they were opened and triggered, a stereo system on a timer meaning to lure someone in when it started playing loud music. Amongst other things, James Holmes had set up his apartment, first of all, with the loud music so somebody would go up there and try to enter, and with so many different things and devices highly calculated, extremely unstable, and designed to cause major harm. He did that so that someone would enter his apartment, make everything go off, then taking his apartment building and making that a massive crime scene to use that as a distraction from the massive crime scene that he was about to cause himself at the movie theater. He wanted all of the police cars and ambulances to go there so he could do what he did in the movie theater without all the chaos of the authorities showing up. It took them 2 full days to make his apartment safe to enter and to safely disable everything. Back at the police station where James is now in custody and now being questioned, officers and investigators are stunned at just how calm and chilled out this guy looks. He's leaning back in his seat, the most monotone voice, no look of concern or actually anything at all for that matter behind his eyes. He talks only for a few minutes before asking for a lawyer, so he does not say much, but what he does tell him is about one thing that he mailed to his psychiatrist, a spiral notebook. He mailed it. It was addressed to Dr. Leanne Fenton, the University of Colorado psychiatrist that he had been seeing leading up to that night in July. Oh yeah, because by the way, 24-year-old James wasn't dumb by any means. He had gotten his degree in neuroscience in 2012 at the University of California, graduating with highest honors and at the top 1% of his class. And he was enrolled as a PhD student in neuroscience at the University of Colorado Medical Campus in Aurora. But in early June of 2012, the month prior to the crime, James dropped out of his studies completely without even really giving an explanation. But we're going to circle back around to that. But for now, this journal that he mailed to his former psychiatrist included all his detailed plans that he had written down prior to the night of July 20th. He had mailed it, but when it was found in the mail room, unopened. Some of the things in his journal read: what is the meaning of life? If you destroy all life, then there is no question to be asked. Targets, random. The cruel twist of fate are unkind to the misfortunate. Venue, airport, or movie theater. He also writes about how having one victim would be, quote, too personal, too much evidence, easily caught, unquote, and writes out his decision to target multiple victims all at once. There were drawings and diagrams of different theater rooms within the movie theater building. He was listing off pros and cons for each one, finally settling on Theater 9 and drawing out the layout, drawing out the floor plan. There were lists of ideas for maximizing the number of victims, notes about timing, entrances, and exits, and then sentences hinting to the movie premiere that he chose, writing, quote, love gone, motivation directed to hate and obsessions, no consequences, no fear, alone, isolated, no work for distractions, no reason to seek self-actualization, embraced the hatred, a dark night rises, end quote. Some people also believe the reason he colored his hair red was to resemble the Joker, although James himself has said that there was no correlation there. He also wrote about losing interest in life, about feeling like his brain and his mind were broken, and about the idea of becoming a quote-unquote force rather than a person. Needless to say, there was something clearly not right in his head and in his brain, and it turns out that his mental health had been declining for a while. On July 23rd of 2012, James Holmes made his first court appearance and was ordered to be held without bond. He was held in solitary confinement to protect him from other inmates. While he was awaiting trial, he was charged with upwards of 152 charges. His trial officially began in April of 2015, almost 3 years after the crime, but there was a lot of preparations from both sides leading up to it. The defense, of course, was going to be zoning in and focusing on his mental health. They were going to go with the insanity plea, arguing that he was in the middle of a severe psychotic break, calling up psychiatric experts to argue that James could not fully understand the morality of his actions, using his journal to say, look, he was delusional, he was experiencing hallucinations, etc., and he was clearly not in the right state of mind. Their point wasn't going to be trying to say that he didn't do it. They were were trying to say that he was legally insane when he did do it, leading to hopefully finding him not guilty by reason of insanity. The prosecution, on the other hand, was also going to be using his journal, but their argument would be, look, it's written, it's drawn out by him clear as day in black and white. This was carefully planned out. He put a lot of thought into doing what he set out to do. It was premeditated, and his intention and his motives are all right here. And he was aware of what he was doing. So that's what the main argument became. Was he insane at the time of the crime, or was he not? And should he be found criminally responsible for his actions? But even prior to the trial, it was delayed for so long for so many different reasons, like seeing if James would be fit to stand trial, evaluating his mental condition, then his team wanting to plead not guilty, but then wanting to plead guilty to avoid the harshest sentence, the prosecution finding more evidence that they wanted to be able to present in trial, investigators seizing even more evidence from his apartment and getting that admitted to be admissible in court, health delays making James unable to appear in court for the hearings, other hearings in which 911 calls and video recordings were presented to be able to use those in trial, then the jury selection in itself, that took 3 months. So many different things at play here, but the biggest topic of conversation was his mental health. James was born in San Diego, California, to his parents, Robert and Arlene. He had a stable upbringing. He was raised by hardworking parents, and as a kid, he was described to be shy, but polite and academically talented. He was a pretty introverted child, but he had always excelled in school from the time that he was little. Pretty much, he was always interested in science, math, computers, technology. Instead of playing with toy cars and stuffed animals or whatever, he was more than likely to play with puzzles and do things to learn new stuff. In high school, he remained a generally reserved kind of guy. He had a few close friends, but he continued to excel in academics. Some maybe described him as quiet and maybe a little odd, but nothing really alarming. In his college years, so from 2006 to 2010-ish, friends and teachers saw him as brilliant and intelligent, but a little bit socially awkward. It was towards his last year or two in college that he really started to become more withdrawn, and he seemed kind of a little bit paranoid at times. But it was really around late 2011, early 2012 when his mental health really went downhill quickly. And again, the crime took place in July 2012. James began experiencing a disconnection from reality. He started openly expressing feelings of detachment from the real world, and his paranoid thoughts began to intensify. He also stopped caring about school so much, which was very out of character for him. He did get into a relationship, but that ended, and that breakup hit him really hard. It was actually that ex-girlfriend who suggested that James seek mental health help from the campus student wellness center because she could tell that he needed it. And in March of 2012 at the University of Colorado, James had his first appointment for his mental state with psychiatrist Dr. Leanne Fenton at the student health clinic shortly after his breakup. He met with her a total of 7 times over a 3-month period, and that psychiatrist expressed concerns about his social anxiety and his, quote, psychotic level thinking. It was her belief that he could have schizoid personality disorder. It sounds like the school clinic wanted to work with him, but he was more so refusing treatment. And then in June of 2012, a month before the crime took place, he dropped out completely. And come to find out, well, first, on July 8th, which was one day after he bought tickets for the movie, James texted a girl, a classmate that he took a liking towards or whatever, he kind of liked her a little bit. He texted her and said, quote, "The floodgates are open. It's in your best interest to avoid me. I'm bad news bears," unquote. But even crazier than that was a phone call. The night of, right before he entered the movie theater, just after midnight, James called the University of Colorado Denver Student Mental Health Emergency Hotline. He told investigators that he called as one last chance to turn back and not do what he was about to do, but the phone rang for around 9 seconds and he didn't hear anything, so he hung up and he walked in. Ultimately, on July 16th of 2015, after 11 weeks of a trial and over 12 hours of the jury deliberating, James Holmes was found guilty of 24 counts, 2 counts for each of the 12 victims that did not make it. He was also found guilty of 140 counts for the 70 people who were injured, on top of the other counts for having not only the weapons that he bought, but also the weapons that he made himself. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole and an additional 3,318 years. His parents were both in shock when they heard what their son did, both saying that if you had told them that this would have ever happened to their family, they would have never believed it. His mother saying, quote, "Not in your wildest dreams would you think that your son would strangers. For someone who loved kids and dogs and always did his homework and his chores, you can't believe it is possible for someone to cause that much harm, let alone the man that you raised, end quote. And finally, I want to end this video by remembering the victims who did not make it. 26-year-old Jonathan, 18-year-old Alexander, 29-year-old Jesse, 51-year-old Gordon, 24-year-old Jessica, 27-year-old John, 27-year-old Matthew, 23-year-old Michaela, 6-year-old Veronica, 27-year-old Alex, 24-year-old Alexander, and 32-year-old Rebecca. This one was tough. I heard some of the victims talking about what it was like to be in that movie theater, and I'm not going to be able to get that out of my head for a very, very long time. But that is all from me today. Thank you guys for sticking around. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy. Be kind to people. Hug your loved ones. And I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. 18-year-old Anna Kepner was from Central Florida. Earlier this month, she went on vacation on a Carnival Horizon cruise ship with her family, but it was a trip that she never came back from. Anna was expected to graduate this year, and she had plans to join the U.S. Navy. In her obituary, her family wrote, quote, "How could we possibly capture every bit of beauty that was Anna Marie Kepner, our Anna Banana, our sunshine, our baby girl? At just 18 years old, she filled the world with laughter, love, and a light that reached everyone around her," end quote. The cruise was a 7-day trip that left from Miami. Massive ship, obviously. It carried almost 4,000 people. On board was Anna, her father, her stepmother, her biological brother, and her step siblings, who were the stepmother's children from a previous relationship. Her grandparents were also on the ship. And according to them, it was supposed to be a big, happy trip with all of them. The grandparents said the family dynamic was pretty close. As far as the kids, they said there were no step siblings. They were all just considered to be one big, happy family. Between the kids, Anna's father and stepmother, they had 3 rooms booked. Anna, her 14-year-old brother, and her 16-year-old stepbrother were all staying in one room. The last night that she was seen by her family, on November 6th, Anna had been complaining that she was feeling pain from her braces, so she went back to her room. Later on, she felt better. She met back up with some family members before they all went to their own rooms for the night. The last thing that she said to her grandma was, "I love you guys, I'll see you later," but they never saw her again after that. Anna disappeared on board, and then she was found deceased in her room, hidden underneath a bed, wrapped up in a blanket, and covered up by life jackets. The boat returned to Miami, and Anna's body was removed in a body bag. From what I could find, it sounds like the last night that Anna was seen, she had gone back to her room, and later that night, her brother and her stepbrother returned to the room as well. Her brother changed clothing, left the room again, leaving Anna alone in that room with her stepbrother. When the brother returned, biological brother, he noticed that Anna was not in the room, but he assumed that she was out doing whatever and assumed that she would come back at some point. There's a possibility that Anna was already gone and already hidden underneath the bed when her brother came back to the room and went to sleep. It sounds like there was one queen bed and a set of bunk beds in the room. Allegedly, there's also CCTV footage showing Anna entering her room for the last time, but she's never seen leaving again. And since then, her biological brother has come out and said that when it was only Anna and her stepbrother in that room, he had gone back to the room, but allegedly the door was locked. And shortly after that, he said that he heard yelling, heard the stepbrother yelling something along the lines of "shut up," and what sounded like chairs being thrown across the room. When her family realized that she was missing, when she did not show up to breakfast with all of them the next morning, her father began looking for her when it was announced over the loudspeaker that there was a medical emergency in Anna's room number. It was a cleaning crew that found her body hidden underneath that bed at around 11 a.m. The cause of death was listed as asphyxia caused by an arm on the neck. Anna also reportedly had bruising on her neck. Now, the thing about this happening on a cruise ship is that, one, there are no police on a cruise ship. They have security, but there's no law that requires them to have actual police officers on the cruise ship. And when something happens on board, because it's on international waters, it immediately goes to the FBI. Of course, though, an investigation cannot be started until the ship comes back to port. And I'm not saying that this is the case in Anna's case, but a lot of the times it's literally only staff members from the cruise line until the FBI can get there. Staff members from the cruise line are trying to protect the cruise line, so evidence gets a little bit iffy, and oftentimes things can get delayed until the ship does go back to the port and until the FBI can officially begin their investigation. But that's what happened when the FBI got involved when they returned back to Miami. And very quickly, we realized that the person that they were paying close attention to was Anna's 16-year-old stepbrother. So we know from Anna's biological brother that he heard yelling coming from the room and what sounded like a struggle. Since then, it's also come out that apparently Anna was really scared and uncomfortable around her stepbrother. Anna's ex-boyfriend said that he witnessed strange behavior from the stepbrother towards Anna, saying that he was obsessed with her. He said that one of the strange interactions was when he was on FaceTime with Anna when her stepbrother walked in at 3 a.m, walked into her bedroom and got on top of Anna. Anna's grandma has also described the stepbrother by saying that he, quote, has demons from his past that he has allegedly been trying to deal with. And following Anna's death, the stepbrother was an absolute wreck and what the grandma described to be an emotional mess, apparently after everything came out. When Anna's death was finally being looked at as a homicide, the stepbrother had to be hospitalized and sent to a psychiatric hospital, and since then he has received psychiatric treatment there. He is now being looked at as a suspect. He has not been criminally charged, so he's out right now staying with a third party. The grandma has said that even though the stepbrother has clear issues, the relationship he had with Anna was very close, and she said they had a true brother-sister relationship. Some people question that. However, you guys, we do not know these people. We are not a part of the family. We don't even really know what's going on in the investigation. So I know it's easy to speculate and get those sort of conversations started, but keep in mind that this is a real family. They are mourning a real person who is no longer here, and it's important that we don't believe everything that we see on the internet. The Kepner family has asked for respect throughout this time and for everyone to remember Anna with laughter, color, sunshine, and love, because that is exactly how she lived her life. Quote, she danced in the light she left behind and it will never fade, end quote. That is all I have for today's video. I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on this investigation to see how everything plays out. But yeah, hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
If you ever want to lose sleep, just look up the Bennington Triangle. It's an area surrounding the Glastonbury Mountain in Vermont where really creepy things have happened, including 5 people who seemingly vanished into thin air over a period of just 5 years. I know we've all heard of the Bermuda Triangle, but honestly this is way creepier because it's this really remote area that's pretty much just a dense wilderness. And the Bennington Triangle connects to some of the immediate towns surrounding this mountain. So we have Bennington, Woodford, Shaftesbury, and Somerset. For the past 10 decades, this area has been known for weird sightings of what locals call the Bennington Monster, as well as unexplained lights and sounds. But most disturbing of all is, like I mentioned earlier, several local people in the surrounding towns have all mysteriously disappeared, and they all share some really bizarre details. All of the victims disappeared around the same time, which was around 3 p.m., all in the same general area of Glastonbury Mountain, and they all went missing during the last 3 months of the year. And one thing that is really disturbing to me is that most of these cases somehow involve the color red. Let's talk about one of the creepiest places in America, a place where people just vanish off the face of the earth, the Bennington Triangle. I know I said the story really focuses on 5 missing people, but there's actually been 6 victims. So the first story really begins in 1943. In November of 1943, Carl Herrick was out hunting with his cousin about 10 miles northeast of the Glastonbury Mountain. At some point, the pair got separated, and after a little while of not being able to find him, Carl's cousin hiked back into town and reported him missing. A huge search was launched, but sadly, just a few days later, Carl's body would be found. His gun was found near his body, no bullets were discharged. But what was incredibly disturbing to investigators is that it appeared he had been squeezed to death. They were hoping that his autopsy would provide more answers, but it really only confused them more. According to reports, Carl's ribs had punctured his lungs somehow, and although they officially had a cause of death, no one could figure out what really happened to him and why. The next disappearance comes 2 years later. It was November 9th, 1945, when 74-year-old Mitty Rivers vanished without a trace. Mitty was guiding a group of 4 hunters on a mountain trek about 4 miles west of Bennington that day. To be a little bit more specific, he and his fellow hunters were just a few miles shy of Vermont Route 9 near Woodford. He was a really skilled outdoorsman and hunter, and he knew this specific area really well because his son-in-law had a campsite on the Long Trail, which he often used. It was around 4 p.m. when Mitty went ahead of his group, and this was near the Hell Hollow Brook area. In just the few minutes it took for his group to catch up, Mitty was gone. A search party immediately went out and searched for him, and it was a pretty extensive search too, which involved the Vermont State Guard. But Mitty, or his body, was never found. It was really weird to the search party though, because in the years prior to this, a good handful of people had gotten lost in the area, but they were always found. So they really thought that they would find Mitty too, but they never did. The only clue that they did find though was one of Mitty's handkerchiefs, which was located by a hiker the following spring along a trail just south of his last known location. The next unexplained disappearance happened in 1946. On December 1st, 1946, 18-year-old Paula Weldon disappeared near the Long Trail, just 2 miles south of where Mitty was last seen. Paula was a student at Bennington College, and she left early that afternoon and told her roommates that she wanted to go and hike the Long Trail. She was able to hitchhike the 6 miles to the trail, which at the time crossed Route 9 near Harbor Road. The person that picked her up dropped her off 2 miles west of the trail, and after this, several people claimed to have seen her and interacted with her in the woods. The last known person to talk to to her was an employee for the local Bennington newspaper, who gave her directions to get back out to the road. At that time, Paula was wearing a light red jacket, jeans, and some everyday sneakers. She didn't have any camping or hiking gear on her, and she definitely wasn't dressed for the winter weather at all, which was odd. Paula never made it off the mountain, and when she failed to show up for her classes the next morning, she was quickly reported missing. This time, a massive search was launched right away, and it even involved the FBI, but absolutely no trace of Paula has ever been found. The fourth disappearance took place on, again, December 1st, 1949, 3 years to the day when Paula disappeared. That afternoon, 68-year-old James Tedford mysteriously disappeared from a moving bus. He was a World War I veteran living in a military retirement home in Bennington, and that day, James was in St. Albans visiting some family. When it was time to head back home, his family took him to the bus stop and watched him get on. The last time that he was ever seen was on a bus that he had transferred to that was heading back to Bennington. It was around 6:15 p.m., but he simply never made it back home, or even off the bus. The bus driver said that a man resembling James may have gotten off the bus in Brandon, which was a village about 70 miles north of Bennington, but this was never proven. In fact, 14 other passengers on the bus all confirmed that James never got off the bus before Bennington. He was sleeping pretty much the entire way, and somehow he vanished into thin air, only leaving behind his belongings on the seat. No one knew he was actually missing for about a week, which was when his superintendent at the retirement home reported him missing. Again, a pretty big search for him ensued, but it turned up no clues, and to this day, James remains missing. Then on October 12th, 1950, 8-year-old Paul Jepson disappeared as well. He and his mom drove out to the Bennington town dump where the family had a herd of pigs. Paul's mom left him unattended in the car for about 30 minutes while she tended to the animals, but when she came back, he was gone. This was at around 4 p.m. Police were quickly called, and their main focus was the surrounding woods and the dump itself, but mysteriously, tracking dogs traced his scent along an adjacent road to an intersection, where it abruptly ended. It was raining really hard that day, so police think that the water could have washed his scent away. So Paul disappeared near the Glastonbury Mountain just like the others. And what's even more creepy is that in the days leading up to his disappearance, he was reportedly obsessed and wouldn't stop talking about the mountain. Outside of some plain colored clothes, Paul was last known to be wearing a red jacket, just like Paula. There's a few theories with Paul's disappearance, which include him running off into the mountains to explore, and maybe just getting lost and dying of exposure. But if that was the case, I feel like his remains would have been found by now. Or some believe that since his scent was traced back to a remote road, someone could have either abducted him since he was alone in the car, or he could have gotten out and was playing in the road when someone driving by accidentally hit him, and in a panic, they took his body and dumped it elsewhere. Still though, I feel like if that was the case, some evidence would have been found to support this. And then just 16 days later, on October 28th, 1950, 53-year-old Frida Langer disappeared while she was hiking in the woods near Somerset. Frida was a really skilled hiker and hunter, and that day, she went to her family's cabin on the shores of the Somerset Reservoir with her husband and cousin. At around 1 p.m., Frida and her cousin took off for a hike, but at some point, Frida slipped and fell into a stream, which soaked her clothes. Since this was late October, she was freezing, so she told her cousin that she was going to take a shortcut back to the cabin to change, and then she would catch up with him after. But Frida never made it back to the cabin. That night, when she was still nowhere to be found, her husband called in to report her missing, which kickstarted another massive search. This time, over 300 volunteers and search and rescue teams scoured the area looking for her, including by air, but no trace of her was found. Her husband told police that Frida had a seizure disorder, so he was worried that the exposure to the cold water from the stream and the cold weather may have triggered a seizure for her. Then maybe she became disoriented and got lost in the woods. But they would have no real answers, at least not for another 6 months. On May 12th, 1951, a couple of fishermen found Frida's body 3.5 miles from her campsite. She was found on the shore of the Deerfield River, which was an area that had already been previously searched. At this point, she was severely decomposed, so authorities weren't able to determine her cause of death. But investigators believe that Frida may have fallen down an embankment into a deep pond where she sadly drowned. And then it was possible that her body was flushed out months later due to the snowmelt. So one by one, people kept disappearing or dying in this area. But it wasn't until Paul's disappearance that journalists started connecting the dots, when they realized that so many other people also disappeared in the same area under similar mysterious circumstances. That's when everyone started questioning what was really going on. Thus, the term Bennington Triangle was created, which was coined by an author named Joseph Citro. People started pointing out the odd similarities between the disappearances and the popular 1933 novel called Lost Horizon, which was about a group of people who became lost in a mysterious mountainy area. The Bennington Triangle has become really popular online for how creepy it is, paired with the unexplained deaths and disappearances witnesses. But what really caught my eye was the eerie similar details between the 6 victims that I mentioned. They all disappeared around the same time, which was 3 p.m., from the same area near the Glastonbury Mountain, and they all disappeared within the last 3 months of the year. And what's super weird was that some of the victims were tied to the color red. Paula and Paul were last seen wearing a red jacket, and in 2019, the remains of a woman were found near the Somerset Reservoir. Her name was Jessica Hildenbrandt, and she was a victim of homicide. She had red hair, and her nickname from her family was Red. Jessica is believed to have been killed by her boyfriend, but that charge against him was later dismissed. And then in August of 2021, the remains of 73-year-old Joseph Schoenig were found in the same area. He died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and he was found in his red truck weeks later. So it's left so many people wondering what's really going on in this area. Could there be a serial killer on the loose? That doesn't seem likely, as all of the victims' profiles were completely different. Could they have all just been tragic accidents due to the rough terrain and cold weather? It's possible that they all fell down an unmarked mine shaft or well, and then just succumbed to the elements. It could be possible that some of them were involved in an animal attack, but again, no evidence of this was found either. Some think their disappearances may have something to do with what locals call the Bennington Monster, which is a Bigfoot-like creature. But needless to say, that's obviously just a conspiracy theory. So now we're left, decades later, with no answers. Just creepy and mysterious deaths and disappearances, one after another. It's been 82 years since the first disappearance, but what really happened to all of those people in the Bennington Triangle remains a mystery.
She reported her ex for stalking, police didn't believe her, they fined her, and then he killed her. It was 2015 in Brighton when Shayna Grice met Michael Lane. They both worked together at Brighton Fire Alarms, and at first they both kind of liked each other, they got on well. Shayna had actually got a long-term boyfriend, Ashley Cook, who she'd been with since school. But like most school relationships, you know, when they're both teenagers, it was kind of on and off. She was almost like exploring what else was out there, and when she met Michael, she was kind of thinking, I don't know if I like him more, and he was obsessed with her from day one. And so they did kind of start a relationship together. She kind of broke things off with Ashley and decided to give it a go with Michael. But Michael was so intense, he was like always watching what she was doing. He would never even let her talk to other men, even in a friendly way. She was like, do you know what, actually this isn't working for me, I'm going to get back with Ashley. But Michael was not going to let this go, and he chillingly even said to one of his friends, she's going to pay for what she's done. So just imagine trying to break up with somebody and they just don't take no for an answer. They even put a tracker on your car. Michael would not leave her alone. He was even ringing her up off like withheld numbers and breathing heavily down the phone, like something off a horror film. It was absolutely terrifying, and things got even worse the more that she ignored him. He sent flowers to her door, and she even noticed damage on her car. She was like, what is going on? She was like, right, actually, I'm gonna call the police. So she called the police and nothing was done. Not long after that, Michael literally chased her down the street, grabbed her phone and pulled her by the hair. So everyone was obviously like, you need to ring police again, so she did. But when police questioned Michael, he manipulated the entire situation. He showed them texts. He was like, look, we're actually in a relationship, she's just lying to you. And police bought it. I don't know about you guys, but this absolutely boiled my blood when I first heard about this. She'd reported her ex for stalking, and police decided to fine her for wasting their time. They made her pay £90. At one point, things had got so bad that she'd even rang police to say he'd stolen a key, broken into her house, and stood there and watched her while he thought she was sleeping. It wasn't long before he killed her. It sends actual chills down my spine to imagine this. In August 2016, as she lay in her bed, Michael crept up to her house in a terrifying disguise. He tiptoed inside using the stolen key, crept into her bedroom, and then slit her throat. Not satisfied with brutally killing this innocent girl, he then rooted through her belongings and stole her bank cards. Without a care in the world, he just wandered down to the local ATM and took money out of her accounts. He then went back to the crime scene, and some people believe that what he did next was the most callous thing of all. He took a petrol can and he set fire to the house where her dead body lay. And when he was arrested the next day, he denied having anything to do with this, and the excuse that he came up with is honestly baffling. He was like, yeah, I did go round, I saw the door was open, and I found the murder scene, and I ran away because I didn't want to get blamed for it. But when police looked at the CCTV and literally saw him stealing money from the stolen bank cards, they knew this was a lie. And at the murder trial, the jury saw right through his lies too. And maybe one of the most infuriating parts of this case is the fact that Sussex police knew that there had been 13 other girls who'd reported this man for stalking. The same exact guy for stalking and harassing these innocent women. Absolutely insane that they then had the nerve to fine Shayna. As if they said she wasted their time, you wasted her life. Michael was eventually sentenced to 25 years in prison, and some people argue that she actually would be still here alive today if the police had actually taken her seriously. What do you guys think? Let me know.
This 21-year-old social media influencer was stalked and killed by her friend that was obsessed with her. Catalina Gutierrez was born and raised in Cordoba, Argentina. She was obviously very beautiful, but she was so much more than that. She was sweet, kind, a friend, a little sister, a daughter. She loved music, but above all else, she loved her family. And going into her teen years, Catalina was becoming a star. She was beautiful, talented at music, she would travel, she had this fun lifestyle, and out of nowhere, Catalina started gaining hundreds of thousands of followers across all her social media platforms. And this was super fun and exciting for Catalina. She was becoming like a proper little influencer. She was getting PR, she was getting brand deals. She was also going into her first year of college, so this was a really exciting time in this young girl's life. And going into that first year of college, Catalina became really good friends with one of her classmates, this guy, Nestor Soda. When Catalina and Nestor met, they became very quick, close friends. Catalina was still with her high school boyfriend, so this friendship with Nestor was very platonic on her side. Nestor didn't really have a lot of friends, so Catalina introduced him to all of her friends. She introduced him to her boyfriend, invited him to all of the hangouts. She introduced him to her family, and Nestor actually got really close with Catalina's family. He would go over for family dinners, family game nights, he would even dog sit their dogs. And the entire time, Nestor is secretly obsessed with Catalina. He was obsessively stalking her social media. He was obsessed with everything she posts and the fact that she had all of these followers. Catalina never led him on, but Nestor was convinced that one day Catalina would wake up and realize that they were meant to be together. There was something really dark going on in Nestor's mind. His entire life, girls thought that he was a creep. And they were right. Catalina was not the first girl that Nestor developed a dark obsession with. Before college, he was stalking, harassing, and threatening countless amount of girls. And this was reported to his high school dozens of times, but nothing ever happened. During a school overnight camping trip, Nestor snuck into one of the girls that he was obsessed with's tents, got on top of her, and attempted to SA her. Luckily, she screamed, and this scared him, and he left. And before he met Catalina at college, there were other girls that Nestor was stalking at their college. He actually memorized all of these girls' class schedules and even had these girls' class schedules written on his bedroom wall. At this point, Catalina is out of her high school relationship, but she started a new relationship with a new boy, and this made Nestor furious. He thought that Catalina belonged with him. He thought Catalina belonged to him. Something in him switches this time. Usually when the girls that he was obsessed with turned him down repeatedly, he would just move on and find a new girl to be obsessed with, but not with Catalina. Without her knowing, he gets her phone's location, and now he's fully stalking her in real life. He's harassing her online. He's being rude to her all of the time and trying to cause problems between her and her new boyfriend. Overall, he's just being terrible to her for months. And anytime Catalina would try to stand up for herself, he would just emotionally manipulate her. On July 17th, 2024, Catalina had plans with her friends to go bowling, and she invites Nestor along. And Nestor asks her if it's good if they meet up alone a little bit before so they could have a little bit of like one-on-one best friend time. They planned to meet up at 9 p.m., an hour before the plans to go bowling, but when Catalina was only a few minutes late, Nestor starts blowing up her phone. He's sending her all these nasty texts. He's furious. Catalina calls her friend Nestor up and she apologizes for being a little bit late. She says that she's running a little bit behind because she had a last-minute deadline for a brand deal that she had to post, which is like totally reasonable. That's her job. But Nestor absolutely freaks out on the phone with Catalina. Tells her to not bother coming, that she's a bad friend, that she ruined his night. He's insulting her and her new boyfriend and says that she's a terrible person that doesn't care about anyone but herself. And this is not true. Catalina does care a lot about other people. She feels terrible that she's upset her friend. So instead of going bowling with her friends, she drives over to Nestor's house so she can apologize. But Nestor, for whatever reason, just snaps and he starts hitting Catalina over and over. He starts punching Catalina in the face until it knocks her unconscious. He ties her up, and once she starts to gain consciousness, Nestor gets on top of Catalina, and while looking her in her eyes, he strangles her to death. She was only 21 years old. Right away, Nestor tries to cover up what he just did to Catalina. He puts her body in the back of her own car and then drives Catalina's car into the middle of nowhere. And he attempts to light her car on fire to destroy her body and any evidence before leaving. But the car did not burn at all. Nestor lit the inside of the car on fire, and then when he left, he closed all of the doors, which put out the fire. Like, you know when you have a candle and then you put the lid on the candle so then the candle goes out? It was not long for Catalina's friends, boyfriend, and family to all realize that she's missing, and they are terrified. Her family and boyfriend are down at the police station to report her missing, and Nestor has the balls to show up at the station to comfort Catalina's family, knowing that he was the one that killed her. And the police were able to quickly track down Catalina's phone location, where they found her car in the middle of nowhere with her body in the car. Her poor family. Catalina was so young and so loved by everyone, and everyone was absolutely devastated and confused. Who would want to kill this poor girl? Everyone in Catalina's life had an alibi except for her friend Nestor. And he changed his story about what he was doing the day that Catalina went missing and was killed about like half a dozen times. And I always say it's a huge red flag when people change their story. They were able to track Nestor's phone location the day that Catalina was killed, and it turns out his phone was in the exact same location that they found her car and body, and this was like the middle of nowhere. When confronted, Nestor cracked and he confessed. His trial began in March of 2025, and because he was a creep his entire life, there was no shortage of girls to testify against him. Nestor never apologized to Catalina's family. He never showed any remorse. In fact, during the trial, he laughed at her family. He laughed at Catalina's family's pain. And this is the same young man that they invited into their home. It's just disgusting. Catalina only ever wanted to be a good friend to Nestor. She invited him along to things when he had no one to hang out with. The only reason she went over to his house that day was to apologize. Even after, he was a terrible, terrible friend to her for the past 5 months. Nestor was sentenced to life in prison, and he will have a chance for early release after serving 35 years. And like always, if you watched the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to Catalina's story. Let me know all your thoughts and opinions in the comments. But while you're there, please remember to be respectful because you don't know who will be in the comments. And while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to every single person that suggested that I cover this case. And I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.